Welcome to Rambling Rogues, a podcast for indie authors. Welcome, Joe.
Welcome. Good to be here, Michael.
Yeah, a second episode this month. We don't usually get two out in a month, so this is a slight record for us. It might be out the slight beginning of March, I guess. Who knows? But either way, we've tried to get two out for people because we didn't do one in January. So today's episode is going to be for a start. It's going to be shorter than the last one. We had a few comments from people saying, the last one was great, but it was a bit long, and it was a bit long. It was about 2 hours, and the one before that was about 2 hours. So we're going to start trying to make them slightly shorter now, hopefully, so people can maybe not feel too overwhelmed by our episodes. Since the last episode, Joe, what have you been up to?
Well, I have currently in my little town that I live in, I've started an art club for anyone and everyone. It's a free thing that I'm doing just to support the community, really, and to help out.
Yeah. And it's sort of a way to bring a sort of more creativity to the local area, isn't it?
Yeah. No, it is. It's to bring the creative field to everyone around here who can't afford to maybe do classes.
But no, that's great that you've wanted to do that and support the community in that way. I imagine, would you recommend people maybe listen to the podcast if they have something similar in their local community, whether it's painting or writing? Would you recommend them getting involved in something like that?
Yeah, definitely. If there's a local club near you, maybe a writing club, try and get involved. And if there isn't, and you'll think that the community, it'll be good for the community, try and set one up.
Yeah, that's what you did, isn't it?
My experience, it doesn't take too much to set up, and you'd be surprised at how many people actually want to do it and would join.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of creative people out there, but just not a lot of outlets for them to get involved in. So no, that's great. What have I been up to the past week since the last podcast? Well, there's the ongoing novel, which I talk about every time. But
very ongoing, isn't it?
Very ongoing, but it is happening. I'm sort of at an editing stage at the moment where I'm looking back over the first sort of section that I've written, and I'm trying to make sure everything sort of flows okay, and just trying to make it a decent, a position where I'm happy enough to carry on with the next bit. So that's basically where I'm at with that. That's what I've been focusing on. This podcast, we're going to be talking to Chris, my brother. He's been on the podcast a couple of times now. And we're going to be talking about some... I actually spoke to him last year, probably, I don't know, mid last year. This is an old recording, but we thought we'd bring it out because it's something I think that is going to hopefully help a lot of authors, maybe. We're talking about some of the common thoughts that the authors have when they're writing a story. They're writing a short story or a long story, whatever. You often have thoughts like, is this good enough? Is this going to get anywhere? And the idea behind the sort of discussion was, what can you do with those thoughts and how can you put them to one side? Because, often when people think things like that, it's something that you're telling yourself rather than any reality, isn't it? And it's hard to overcome those things. But there is, there are ways you can make those voices go away and just focus. So that's sort of the focus point of this discussion. Before we jump into that, though, we've got last episode we've set a writing prompt for listeners to send in their stories from, and we had a few responses. So I'm just going to read out those responses quickly now, a few of them anyway. So the prompt was, "The light faded as I disappeared beneath the water." The first response we had was from Elizabeth Thomas. She wrote, the light faded as I disappeared beneath the water. I was grateful that my antics in the swimming pool were helping me now. The experience of diving and checking how long I could hold my breath gave me the confidence to dive deeper. The searchlights had disappeared. As I gasped and resurfaced, bobbing with the waves, I looked at the starlit sky and smiled. My lungs were strong, but I knew I could not test myself again. In my euphoria, I was caught off guard as the boat roared back, blinding me in its spotlight. The chase was back again as I swam for my life. Okay, and another response we got was from someone called Stephen Oliver. The light faded as I disappeared beneath the water. I saw the searchlights move on, seeking me and my mermaid and merman parents. They'd finally managed to escape. They'd finally managed to rescue me from the institute where I'd been since I'd been kidnapped as a baby, constantly being experimented on. And I was returning to my natural habitat, never to be seen on the surface again. I'll do one more. The light faded as I disappeared beneath the water. Oh, this is from Karen Rose, by the way. The light faded as I disappeared beneath the water. The water was still and silent. My eyes were watching the surface, becoming further and further away as my body lowered into the depths of the sea. Bubbles escaped through my lips. I had never thought this would be the way to go. Never thought it would be this calm. I closed my eyes for the last time. It's a bit of a bleak one, but no, thank you so much for all those responses. Keep them coming. This week we've got a new prompt, and that is the beast appeared through the fog. So let us know what you can come up with for that prompt. So anyway, yeah, Joe, we as I mentioned before, this episode is all about trying to keep people inspired and deal with some of those sort of negative thoughts they might have when they're writing. Is that something that you had to struggle with when you've been creating in the past?
I think especially I struggle with that a lot. It's it can stop you from doing anything really. It can incapacitate you from getting up and just being productive. But what I found is that you just have to you just have to push yourself. You have to stop thinking and just do something. Just doing something will get you then going on to doing more.
Absolutely, yeah. It's just overcoming that sort of mental barrier, isn't it? A lot of the time,
taking that first step. That's what it is.
Yeah. So, without further ado, then we'll jump into the interview with Chris. Well, thanks for joining me again, Chris.
Yeah, you're very welcome. It feels like only yesterday.
I know, so soon since the previous podcast.
I did threaten that I'd be back.
You did.
Yeah.
And I feel like you're sort of the best person, in a way, to talk to me about today's topic, because we've talked about this so much together.
Personally,
over the years. I've looked at your drafts, you look at my drafts. We've both expressed the same issues and struggles.
Frustrations. Existential crises.
Yes, exactly. And these are, it feels like these are dark times for authors at the minute. Sometimes maybe feels like you've got the whole system against you.
I think if you're a celebrity, it's fine. You'll do very well.
Yeah, exactly.
Not mentioning anyone in particular.
Exactly. But also, I do want to try and bring an element of hope to this. And I mean, these are also great times for authors in a sense that you can more than ever get yourself out there by your own merits and attracting your own audience. So there are good things too. But all the same, all authors sort of struggle with similar things, I think, in their minds when they're writing. And I've put some of those struggles together into a series of questions, and I'm going to ask them to you, and you can tell me what your sort of advice would be, and if you maybe thought some of these things yourself, even.
I'm sure I will have done. And these are, there are. I'm preempting your questions here, but there are no definitive answers to these kinds of questions.
No, of course there aren't.
And I'm not here to tell anyone how to write or what the correct answer is. But if I can help anyone simply by going through how I have dealt with things and what works for me, the process that works for me, and obviously everyone needs to find their own process, but at best people can learn from my mistakes.
Yes, yeah, exactly.
I've made a lot of mistakes.
But I think that's kind of what it's all about, isn't it? Writing is about mistakes.
And it took me a long time to learn that, but maybe I'm skipping ahead and answering a question before you've asked it here.
Well,
so.
Yeah, possibly. Well, let's start from the beginning. Where do I even start?
Start at the beginning. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean chapter one. I would advise it. In recent years, I'm getting very, very old now, which is quite depressing in many ways. But writing is one of those things that, if you're lucky, most of us can continue to do it throughout our lives. It's not like, being a sprinter or, a stunt person or even, a musician, where your body eventually tells you enough. I think if you retain your faculties, you can carry on writing throughout your life, which is great because you get better every time you do it. And I've forgotten the question.
Where do I even start?
Oh, yeah. Where do I start answering this question? And I finally got to a point now where I read things I wrote from the last 5 years and don't hate them. And that's relatively new for me. I would frequently write things and put them out in the world and then bitterly regret them and read it back and hate it and want to rewrite every single word. And you can't, that way madness lies. You've got to move on. And like we discussed earlier, you will make mistakes, and mistakes are great because you learn from them. And I know that sounds infuriating to young writers, and a young writer is anyone who's new to writing. You could be a 60-year-old young writer, 80-year-old young writer, but you have an idea and you want to do it and you want to get it out there and you want it done, and the idea that you might have to let go and it not be perfect and start again is unthinkable. But on the other side of that process really, really helps. So I've learned a lot in the last few years, and I'm kind of starting to follow my own advice now, simply because I don't hate the things I've written. Ask me again in 10 years. But I used to jump in and out all over the place, and I'd have an idea for some characters and what a cool scene and an exchange and a twist and a mysterious thing. I'd write scenes and then trying to stitch them together. I never, ever, ever do that anymore. I write everything sequentially. In my most recent book that isn't released, I can't talk about it yet, but it's written. I loved writing it, but there was one section where I thought, I'm not totally sure what happens here in chapter X. So I'll jump to chapter Y because I know what happens in chapter Y. And I wrote myself into such a black hole because it was all flowing so well, but then I was kind of uncertain about some plot points, and I would leave gaps, and it spiraled. And I wrote about 3 chapters ahead from the gap, and the whole thing fell apart. And the only way to fix it was to go back to where I'd been and write sequentially. Again, that's what is currently working for me. You may want to write the finale first. That's fine if that works for you. So when I say start at the beginning, I don't necessarily mean chapter 1, although I personally would advise that that's what works for me. When I say start at the beginning, write. I've got this mantra now. In the last year or so, I've developed a mantra, which is just write the thing. The last time, one of the times I was on here, I was talking about my folk horror novel, The Filed Witch. I want to talk about other things I've written, but some of them are works in progress. Some of them aren't published yet, and I can't. So I'm still talking about that, but I love that book, so that's fine. And it's inspired by a local legend relatively near to us. We have a witch's grave, and I wanted to write her story. And the book literally begins, there is a witch buried in Woodplumpton, because that's, I know that sounds incredibly sort of simplistic, but once you make a statement like that, once you say what it is, once you just write the thing, you've kind of thrown down a gauntlet for yourself. And then you say, well, then what? Rather than trying to, it was an overcast December day and our protagonist turned up his collar and beat a hasty retreat along the cobblestone alleyways of the, what am I trying to say? Some books start like that. I think in some ways I was rewriting 1984 there. But 1984 begins with the clock striking 13, which they don't do. It's write the thing. Tell the reader what world this is, whose story this is. And the brilliant thing is that if it's rubbish, no one has to read it. No one has to even see it. If you hate it, burn it, delete it, fire it into space, whatever you need to do. You may end up not using the first chapter. You might write a whole novel and then the point is whatever idea is in your head. So I want to write a novel about a time traveling horse, and you say, edit this out, obviously. What's like a generic horse's name? No, okay, scratch that. You might say, I want to write a story about a time-travelling dog. And then you just write down, Rover was chronologically displaced. I mean, not that. That's terrible, and I've kind of nicked it from Slaughterhouse-5, being unstuck in time. But the point is, you write the thing, and then you react to the thing. That's how you start.
Yeah. And it's interesting. I mean, you said about, you don't always have to write, to begin your story from the beginning. But in my case, with something, as you probably know, something that I've written, I assumed it was the beginning, and then later on you find out it isn't the beginning.
Yeah, very true. Yeah,
it is interesting how things can evolve, and it is literally just about getting down whatever idea you have and just getting it on the page, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
From there.
And you can once you get to the end, you can always go back and change the beginning and maybe make it the middle. And the important thing is getting the words onto the page. So many people sit around and plan, and I'm all for workshops and writing exercises and character development. I do a lot of that kind of stuff, but there's no substitute for literally writing the words down on the page and starting with word number 1, then getting to 40,000, 50,000, 85,000, whatever if it's a novella or a novel or whatever you're doing, like you will, if you carry on, you will get to the end. And when you've got to the end, you've got a book, and that can be fixed, and that can be tweaked, that can be burned if necessary. But the point is, you've done it.
Yes. Yeah. So in short, if you've got an idea, write it down.
Write it down. And don't worry about it, just write down the idea. We there's a story of mine, I think it's on the Rogue Animal website, called Candlemas. And that's a great example that comes up for me in conversation a lot, because, where do you get ideas from? We were in the pub many, many years ago, and you said, it was September, I think. No, it was October. And you said, I can't believe they're selling mince pies in the shops already. And I said, yeah, next year they'll be selling them in September. And then I said, then the year after that.
Bugger. One second.
Right.
I'll just mute that so that doesn't happen again. Sorry, maybe just re-say that last sentence.
And you said, I can't believe... it was October, and you said, I can't believe they're selling mince pies in the shops already. And I said, yeah, next year they'll be selling them in September. And then the year after that, June. And then the year after that, they'll sell them all year round, and every day will be Christmas. Just as a silly little thing to say in the pub. And then I thought, why is every day Christmas? I thought because it's a dystopian world where Yuletide is enforced. And then, the story spiraled from there. And that was a thing of, okay, we'll just write that down. So I wrote a scene of someone in a carol service who's really hot and sweating. You think, well, why are they so hot? And you realise it's because it's mid-July. And so they stop singing because their throat is parched from the heat, and they get beaten up by the community support elves. I had that idea, dystopian Christmas. I thought, well, just write. So I wrote a scene at a carol service in July. And I had no idea where the story was going, but I wrote the idea down in quite a simple way, and the rest of the story spiraled from there. That's
and so once you've got the idea down, inevitably at some point you're going to ask yourself the question. Probably, at least I will. Is this good enough? And when you have that question, what's the answer?
It's an awful question that we constantly ask ourselves, and people won't like the answer to this, but. Is it good enough? Probably not, is the answer. Because you have an idea in your head, you see something, you have a vision or whatever you want to call it, or a dream. And the thing that you put on paper invariably is not quite what you imagined, because maybe you're not quite as good as you hoped you were, or it hasn't fallen the way you thought it would, and the plot came alive and twisted away from what you imagined. But the thing is, nobody else in the world saw the vision that you had. All the rest of the world has are your words on the page. So that's good enough. But you'll beat yourself up. You'll never live up to your own expectations. And the truth is, and this is, again, in terms of sort of where I'm at, as somebody who's only very recently started to read things from a few years ago and say, you know what, I don't hate that. And I think it's because I spent a lot of time, certainly in my 20s, trying to perfect things. and trying to make them good enough because I couldn't accept the fact that they weren't. And then you polish and you rewrite and you edit and then you come away and then a year later you still hate it and it still isn't the thing that you hoped it would be or thought it would be. I knew I had a bit of a light bulb moment when I gave a novel to a friend to sort of beta read, and I got some great feedback, but one of their things was, actually this chapter, it doesn't work, it doesn't flow, you need to do something here to fix that flow. And it was almost going to print at this time, and I thought, they're absolutely right. How do I fix this? And it wasn't an easy fix. So this is a big getting in there and tinkering and reassembling things. And I thought, I'm going to let it go. I'm going to let it go out into the world with this flaw in. And it is a flaw, and I'm glad it was pointed out. And there was a release to that and a relief, and I felt really happy. I know that sounds a bit bizarre, but I felt kind of almost giddy with a kind of joy of putting something out that was a bit flawed. Because I'd let it go. Unlike so many things in my 20s where I wouldn't let them go because they weren't perfect. I thought, to quote one of my favourite TV shows of all time, Better Call Saul, perfection is the enemy of perfectly adequate. Now, you can debate the merits of that, but I think when it comes to writing, nothing is a substitute for done. A hypothetically brilliant novel is hypothetically brilliant, but a finished novel is out there in the world and people can read it and make their own decision, and someone will love it. Other people will hate it. You don't know that. You've just got to, at some point, you've got to put things out there. And I had this joy of releasing something that was, maybe not perfect, but as close as damn it. But also, crucially, I felt like I'd learned something because I knew my friend who'd pointed out the flaw was entirely correct. And I thought, you know what? I will never make that mistake again. The next book I write will be better. Like Ed Wood, worst movie you ever saw? My next one will be better. It's awful, but that's the mantra. That's the mentality you've got to have. Any mistake is great because you've learned from it. Read something that you've written, and I hate to say it, and maybe this isn't the experience for everyone. It certainly is for me. You read something you've written, and chances are you will hate it. But that's good because you think, what did I hate about it? What is bad about it? Write that down and then never do it again.
Yes,
exactly. That's how you learn.
Exactly. So I guess the answer is just that. Is this good enough? No. But it probably never will be for me.
But your next one will be better.
So I guess this leads on to the next question sort of naturally. Why am I doing this?
That's a great question again, and one I constantly ask myself. And there are two answers really. I mean, if you're incredibly lucky, they might be the same answer. Unlikely. One could be because it makes me lots of money. Now, chances are, if you're listening to this, indie authors podcast, you're not making loads of money from writing. Chances are you've got a full-time job that pays the bills, and you've probably got kids and pets and bills and responsibilities and no free time, and you have to steal precious seconds and use them to write when you should be relaxing and unwinding, and instead you're sort of burning yourself out to the point of exhaustion just to have that creative outlet. And you think, why am I doing this? Because when you step away from it, you feel even worse, I think, psychologically, in terms of mental health. People who are creative need to create. Even if we don't have time, we make time, because if we don't, it's not good for us. I think you could be a successful author who makes lots of money. I say that as somebody who isn't, who's somebody who writes and gets paid a little bit to write bits here and there, but ultimately has a completely different job to support themselves from day to day and pay the bills. You can make money as a self-published author on Kindle Direct Publishing if you write certain genre books. And I don't say that in a disparaging way. There are certain, romance or whatever, there are certain genres that people, if you tick certain boxes, people will want to read those kind of books. And they're written, I've spoken to people who write these kind of books and make a living off it, and they're written to a template of sorts. Certain things, certain conventions have to be hit, certain boxes have to be ticked. The cover has to look a certain way. It must be set in a certain period, and I'm not knocking that. Some people enjoy reading that, and some people can write that and can do that for money. Or alternatively, if you're incredibly savvy, you could go into your local, high street bookshop, look at what's currently trending, for want of a better word, what's selling, what are the top sellers at the moment. Now, most of them will be celebrity cookbooks, but if you're not a celebrity chef, it's generally crime fiction is a big thing. Look at what's selling and tailor make something. Like I've never tried this, but it's possible. It's like any other business, you can succeed in it. What we want as authors is to tell our story and be successful, and chances are you won't be. So it depends. Why do I do this? What do you want from it? If you want to make money as a writer, write something that will definitely sell. Write something that is currently popular. Although there's the worry, of course, by the time you finished it, trends will have changed. As a kind of, as somebody who writes from the heart, there's that 1 in a million chance that you might be the trend setter. Yeah. But then we were talking just before we started recording, some of the greatest literary works of all time weren't recognised in the author's lifetime. I'm a huge fan of Dracula. Bram Stoker was a clerk for most of his life, and then in his later life, he worked in theatre, and he did, he was a journalist, he published various things, and he did, his books were published in his lifetime. Dracula was published in his lifetime, and he saw modest success, but he died a relatively poor man, which is why, bit of a sidebar, but then I do have a podcast dedicated to books, to horror books, from page to screen. A few years after Bram Stoker had died, Nosferatu came out, which is a Dracula adaptation in all but name. They changed the name of Count Dracula to Count Orlok and various other things, and his widow wasn't very happy about that, not only because it was sort of her late husband's intellectual property, but he died a poor man and not left her anything. And she thought, hang on, if Dracula's making money, I should be getting that money. But it goes to show, there was another horror novel released at the same time as Dracula, which outsold it. And I don't remember what it was called. Nobody reads it anymore. It's, Dracula is one of the most enduring fictional characters of all time, one of the absolute icons of literature and cinema. And the thing that you're currently working on, the character that you're creating on, could well be the next Dracula. But you might not live to see that. No. And so, why do we do this? I think you have to do it because you love it.
Yes, yeah.
Unless you're in it for the money, that's it. That's possible. But really, we all hope that we can write the stories that we love and we need to tell and we want to tell with the characters that feel like our family, and that we will experience that kind of bizarre success that a very small fraction of authors are actually lucky enough to see in their lifetime. But the chances are you won't, and you have to accept that, and you have to write for the love of it, and write because it's cathartic, and write, it might not be the consolation you want, but if you're slaving away at something that probably won't make you any money, and may not even be recognised at all, let alone in your lifetime, don't torture yourself. Enjoy the process. Because when you read something that the author has loved writing, you can tell. Yeah. It jumps off the page.
Absolutely. And this boils down to something that Joe and I actually talk about quite a lot, and I've spoken to with you, and it's something you've sort of reiterated there quite strongly. Why were you doing this in the first place? Yeah. That's the question you've got to ask yourself. Yeah. Am I doing this to make money? If so, there's probably better ways of doing it. Yeah. If you love writing, then that's it, isn't it? That's why you do it. Yeah. And it's hard. I mean, it's hard to face up to that fact, because obviously everyone who writes got wider dreams. They want to see their work somewhere, but ultimately you love doing it, so that's why you should be doing it.
Yeah, yeah. The most recent thing I've written, when the idea just first sort of popped into my head, all those other voices crept in there saying, "Well, this is pointless. Don't do it. You won't do it justice. It won't be good enough. Everyone will hate it. Blah, 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 blah." But then there was this one solitary voice that said, "Yeah, but I will enjoy writing this. I will love writing. I will love inhabiting this world. I will love writing those characters. And those dissenting voices had nothing to say to that. I said, yeah, but what? I will love this process. And, that's catharsis.
Yes, absolutely. The next point applies to people who've actually done the hard work. They've finished the book. And it's not a question, it's more of a statement. But people always say just one more edit before sending it off. I've said it, I'm sure you've said it. What's the answer? What can you do to dissuade yourself from that mindset?
I'm a psychopath. Some people say that writing is rewriting. I disagree. But then, as I said at the beginning, there are no correct answers. Your process is your process. If you want to rewrite and rewrite and rewrite, but there does come a point where you will have to let go. And somebody once pointed out that when you hold your published book in your hands, you open it at a random page and it's the page with the typo on. It's inevitable. There will always be something. And you know what? It's a bit like it's a bit like plot. You know what? I'll fix it for the next one. When you see that typo, of course, you just want to burst into tears and say, wait, it's a mistake, burn every copy. It's not. You just let it go and say, you know what? For the second edition, we'll fix that errant comma or whatever it is, because it means nothing. But yeah, I appreciate there are bigger problems than errant commas. And maybe I'm a bit glib here. My latest book, the third draft, is the final draft for me. I've moved on now. I'm not sticking in that world.
Yeah.
I mean, fictionally, yeah, because I'm going to write a sequel. But I mean, I'm not staying in the editing mode. I'm not an editor. I'm a creator. And something that's I found really helpful for this. This is another big piece of advice that I give people, and they react in horror. And I understand, because I would have reacted the same way even 10 years ago. But about 5 years ago, I started writing everything with a pen. So my first draft is always in a notebook written with a fountain pen. And at one point, I resented that, because I thought, well, no, because the time that I, in inverted commas, waste transcribing that, it is wasted time writing. But what I've realised that you do, if I sit at a laptop or a computer or whatever and type one sentence, you want to go back and reword it and delete it and worry, and you can't even get the thing written. So no, I just write with a pen, and I use a fountain pen because my handwriting is terrible, by the way. I frequently can't even read what I've written, so you don't even have to have great calligraphy to do this, because I certainly don't. It's more because that feels very lovely to me. It feels very lovely on the page, and it flows. And it almost seems like that there's more of a sort of conduit between your brain and your hand. Yeah. And you don't obstruct yourself. You don't question things. You don't doubt. You just write down the ideas that are in your head. Terry Pratchett used to say that the first draft was you watch the film in your head and then you write down what's happening. And that's really true. Like, you have this idea, treat yourself to a posh notebook, with whatever you're into, whether it's a velvet thing with a pentagram on the cover, or a nice pot of tea, or some flowers, or kittens, like whatever brings you joy, whatever you're into. You can get those ones that are like chainmail. They weigh a ton, but it's like a chainmail bound. But if you're doing sword and sorcery, treat yourself to one of those and a really nice pen. Enjoy the process. Smell the pages. Feel the ink on the page. It's a wonderful sensation. And you're totally unfettered. And then you write a book, and you don't worry about word count. The book I'm working on at the moment, I'm not even doing chapters. I just write, and then you come to transcribe it. But of course, as you transcribe, you're much less likely to make a spelling mistake, because you're not writing directly from your brain, you're copying. But also, you'll see a sentence and think, oh, I don't like the way that's worded, and you'll spot a plot hole. You'll realise that a character has brown eyes in one scene and green eyes in the next. A name's wrong. Inconsistency. So your first draft is actually your second draft, because you've written it once in pen and then you type it up, and then you're halfway there. Yeah. And then put it away, move on to the next thing, even if it's just a few weeks or a month or whatever, and then you do your third draft.
Yeah.
It helps. I'm very lucky because I've got some really talented friends who are proofreaders and beta readers. And after I've done the second, when it's really rough, I give it to other people, mainly for their feedback on the story, but I also trust their opinion on, highlighting typos and things. So once I go through with their feedback, the third draft is just kind of tightening up loose ends, fixing spelling mistakes, inconsistencies, and I leave it there.
Yeah.
And I know most people would balk at that, but I mean, I spent more than 10 years co-writing my first novel, and it was just like 10 years of pulling teeth and rewriting and, let's change that, let's reword that, let's put that bit there instead of there, and then you get to the end of the 10 years, and you were 20, then you're 30, and you think, you know what, I don't really like this anymore. The characters are terrible, the idea's not very good, and it's not very well written. We're going to have to start from scratch and rewrite the whole thing. It's that way madness lies.
Yeah.
Just write it, get it done, move on. That's
yeah. And I don't mean to be bleak, but we all have a finite amount of time on this planet. And
well, exactly. It's fine when you're 20 to say I'm going to spend the next 10 years tinkering with my masterpiece because, then I'll die and that will be my legacy. But then you get to 30 and think, oh, actually, this isn't actually very good. I've got to write another masterpiece, but I better be quick about it because I can't wait another 10 years.
Then one day you find 10 years have got behind you.
Exactly. No one told you when to write.
Yes. Half a page of scribbled lines. So.
I certainly have no desire ever, as someone hurtling towards 40, I have no desire ever to spend 10 years working on a book ever again.
Yeah.
A year, I think, is enough for me.
And actually that point about writing things down, it's on actual paper, committing it to paper, is actually something that I used to do when I was very younger. That's how I always used to write, and then I would get it onto the computer afterwards. But I've lost that, so maybe it's something I need to go back to.
I think it might not work for everyone, but it really revolutionised the whole process for me.
Yeah.
And I found my writing was better as a result of it, and also I enjoyed it more. And you can write in the park, you can write in a beer garden, you can write on a train whilst looking at beautiful scenery. Whereas if you're on a laptop, you can go to a coffee shop if you want to be, one of those the cliche.
People. Yeah.
But generally, you're kind of shackled to your home office or whatever, and it's writing is writing. The words are in you. The story is in you. It doesn't matter where you are. It doesn't matter what you're using. But there's something beautiful about sitting in a beer garden on a lovely spring afternoon.
Yes.
Writing the great idea you had in your head. Safe in the knowledge that no one will ever see this. When somebody reads this, it will be a version that I've typed up. And when I type it, I will fix all the mistakes. But the important thing is, it's there. The words are done. The story is out of your head. Yeah,
absolutely. I'm mindful that we're both quite hungry, so we'll rush through we'll sort of breeze through these next two. But something that I usually say to myself, I'm sure lots of authors do, writers do when they're looking at their drafts. You'll compare yourself to someone else. I'll say, I'm not as good as Tolkien. I'm not as good as I'm not as good as Stoker and whoever you look up to. So what's the answer to that?
Again, it's a bit like is this good enough? No. Why am I doing this? It's a bit pointless. Am I as good as X? No, you're not. You're not, and you never will be. But they're not as good as you at doing what you do. It goes back to the why are we doing this? And it has to be for pleasure. It has to be. If you're not enjoying it, the reader won't enjoy it. And you have to tell, and this sounds almost cliche, it's spouted so often, you tell your story. I think the last time we were on, we were actually talking about Doctor Who, but we were talking about adaptation, novelizations of TV episodes, and how you tell like a version of a story. And I said in that episode, I said, what's your favourite story? Tell it. Even if you don't have an angle, say for example your favourite story is Sleeping Beauty, write it down. Now the version you write down, it won't be the Disney version word for word, it won't be the Grimm's version word for word, it won't be Neil Gaiman's Snow Glass Apples, it will be your version. It might not be good, it might not be, but the point is, like, every time you tell a story, it's your version of it. And nobody else is you. Nobody else sees the world through your eyes. Nobody else feels like you do. Nobody has the same specific set of influences that you do. So yeah, and the thing I've written recently that I haven't really talked about yet is actually a fantasy. And I'm a huge Tolkien fan. And if I'd ever stopped myself at any point and said, this isn't as good as Tolkien, I said, well, no, why bother? But I'm not trying to do The Lord of the Rings. I'm trying to do my own version of fantasy, which is nobody else's. And it's very, very much, connected to the place that I am from and the things that I love. And it's difficult to talk about without giving stuff away, but it's about music and it's about nature, and I have I'm not better than anybody else at doing these things, but I have a very specific set of influences, and when all those things, the confluence of those influences come together, that's Chris Newton's fantasy story. The Filed Witch is Chris Newton's folk horror story. Convent Crescent was mine and Zoe Swan's supernatural horror story. Nobody else is you, and it's wonderful to have inspiration. The second best thing is when you read something by an author you love and think, I'd love to do something like this, and then you do. The best thing is when you read something by an author you hate and think, I could do this 10 times better. So don't compare yourself to your heroes. Compare yourself to the people you hate.
Yes.
And not just people who write terrible books in terrible genres. Say you're really into cowboys, and somebody has written a terrible cowboy book. You think, right, I'm going to show you how you write a cowboy book. And that other author might be really successful and beloved because they do that. But the reason you hate their stuff is because that's not what cowboys are to you. That's not what pirates are to you. That's not what Picts are to you. Because you tell your version. So no, you'll never be the same as whoever you compare yourself to, and that's a good thing, because even if you were as good as George R.R. Martin at writing kind of Wars of the Roses, Imperial Rome-esque high fantasy drama, people would just compare you to him.
Yes.
And he already exists. Game of Thrones already exists. Yeah. So why do it again?
Exactly. Cultivate your own style.
Yeah.
You know what you like.
Yeah.
So put it to paper.
Exactly.
So the last question, I guess, is how you've finished your work. You're sort of at that crossroads now. Where does it go next? Do you self-publish it? Do you seek representation? How do I get my work out there?
And you get your work that's the $1 million question. As someone who's done kind of both routes, with mixed levels of success, there I guess there are lots of options, but to narrow it down, there are two really. You can self-publish something, or you can send it to somebody and hope that they publish it for you. And as someone who's done both, if you're giving your work to somebody else, they have to be the right person. You have to trust them with it, and you have to know that they're connected enough in the right circles, in the right fields, the right genres. I co-wrote a genre thing many years ago, and the publisher we were with was quite connected within that field, and we did a lot of conventions and things with a small degree of success. But ultimately, I think that publisher was out. They had some sort of A-list clients who made them a fair bit of money, and I think that they were kind of out to make as much money as they could on the side, and that's what our book was, which is not to be sniffed at. We had a book published and in shops, and we did some signings. It was great, but you never quite feel that the person selling it believes in it enough to push it. So things I'm looking into now, I'm hopefully going to be working with some people who actually I trust a bit more with my work. But in the self-publishing route, I'm part of Safety Pin Publishing, which is a sort of indie publishing collective. So it's it's much more than self-publishing where you literally do everything yourself. I can't do half the things. But what we've done, we've sort of pulled together between us. We I can do typesetting and book layout. I'm not an artist. We've got artists, we've got graphic designers, we've got professional proofreaders, we've got professional, Gary Buckland, who does our jacket design. He lectures in book design at UCLan. You know, we're not amateurs by any stretch of the imagination. They're all, between us, we're all sort of published authors and professional artists, professional designers. You know, we've come together to make the kind of books that we love. And that's, if you are going that kind of indie route, and I don't say that in a disparaging way, you know, I don't mean to be disparaging of self-publishing. Or what I mean is, if it is literally self, but you're taking a hell of a lot on. And I would be very wary of putting something out there that doesn't have a great cover, for example. And if you can't do it, find somebody who can, because I think it will affect the way your book looks. And of course, don't judge a book by its cover, but everyone does. Especially now in the digital age where people are scrolling through, like, you've got to have a great cover. It can't look amateur.
It's difficult. You know, a lot of writers maybe aren't in such a great financial position or whatever. And, and it's difficult. It is difficult, but ultimately, if you want to get your book out there, these are things you have to consider.
And that was something we did with Safety Pin. You know, it was very much sort of pooling resources, because you know, we don't have much money, but we know people who are very talented artists and graphic designers, and we thought, well, what can we do? How can we pool our resources and help each other and create books together? And you know, so it's a network. You know, you can do it without spending money if you know the right people. Absolutely. And you support each other and help each other. It's all very socialist. But also, you know, if you are going to take that leap and go the indie route, you need to know your audience. That's the crucial, I think, because we've, you know, Safety Pin's been quite successful, you know, modestly successful, I would say.
I think you've done great, yeah.
And work. I think the reason for that is because we were very, very, very clear from the very first conversation about starting this thing, what kind of books we wanted to make, because we knew the communities of readers who were into that kind of stuff. We do, for anyone who doesn't know, we do kind of dark, historical, and horror, and with a local angle. Because so my friend Peter Catebread, who I set up Safety Pin with, he writes Victorian murder mystery novels, but the first one is set in Victorian Morecambe. And the sequel is set in neighbouring Lancaster. So of course we do fairs and cons around that area, and it's especially around Christmas, it's an easy sell. Cozy murder mystery, Victorian era, but in your town. People buy that, you know, because even if it's not their cup of tea, it's a friend of a friend. And similarly with the kind of horror, dark fiction stuff that I'm involved with, my novel is very much about local folklore, a local witch. Zoe Swan's novel Chingle Hall that we published is about a local haunted house. And I'm not saying that you have to necessarily do local stuff, but if you're grassroots and you're literally doing cons and fairs and trying to get in local bookshops, if you're fighting the machine, which has thousands and millions of pounds behind it for marketing, and all you've basically got is the cover of your book. So the cover has to look amazing, but the title has to tell people what it is. And I think, like, locally, you know, the Filed Witch doesn't mean anything to anybody outside the Filed. But I saw some reviews on Amazon the other day, actually, of people, completely strangers to me, who said, "Oh, I'd never seen a book set in the Filed before, so I bought the Filed Witch and I loved it." So that's brilliant, you know. And that's very, you know, it's very basic stuff. But and I'm not saying, you know, give it local interest. The point is, know what you're writing and who you're selling it to, and target them directly.
Absolutely.
And it can be done, but you've just got to be very clear about that.
Yeah, having a foundation is I think is important. It's something we talk about to people quite a bit. Is that having that some sort of audience helps, obviously, of course. But also, if it's the first book you've self-published and you're putting it out there and you're worried about, is it going to get anywhere or not? I don't know a lot about putting things out myself. Just put it out there. If it doesn't succeed, it's fine, because you can keep putting books out, and each time you're going to learn a bit more, and that book's still going to be out there. Yeah. So people are going to come back to that as you grow your audience and find it, and you can change the cover, you can change all sorts. So you know, it's fine to make mistakes. It's fine to keep going, to keep growing. So so yeah, I think it's very important that people just just do,
keep writing and keep going.
Yes,
yeah,
exactly. Yeah. I think that's a nice note to
Yeah.
to leave on. Actually, yeah. Or is there any? Are there any points you want to leave people with? You've got your podcast. You've got Safety Pin.
Yeah, if you want to hear me waffling on some more, you can check out From Page to Screen, which is a horror podcast where we talk about things like Dracula and Frankenstein and compare the books to the films. Also, me and my friend Mark Charlesworth have a podcast called A Book at Breakfast, where we talk about a different book every month. We're doing some non-fiction books at the moment. We're just about to release an episode on Why We Love Middle Earth, which is by some of our favourite podcasters, Alan and Sean from the Prancing Pony podcast. And coming up, we're going to do some Bill Bryson, some Caitlin Moran. We're going to do the Tao of Pooh, which I'm very excited about, by Benjamin Hoff. And check out safetypinpublishing.co.uk, where you can buy some of my books and Peter's Victorian Murder Mysteries and Zoe's Chingle Hall novel about England's most haunted house. And keep reading and keep writing. Just write the thing. That's my mantra. Just write it. If you've got an idea, write it down.
Absolutely. Thanks so much again, Chris.
Thank you.
So we're at the point of the podcast now where I talk about a book that's been sent to us. This week's book is called From Here to 14th Street, and it's by Diana Rubino. So if you're familiar with the podcast, you'll know we talk about three things that I enjoyed from the first chapter of the book, and then I'll let you make your own decision about whether you might want to buy it yourself. So to begin, I'm just going to read a quick synopsis. It's 1894 on New York's Lower East Side. Irish cop Tom McGlory and Italian immigrant Vita Caputo fall in love despite their different upbringings. Vita goes from sweatshop labourer to respected bank clerk to reformer, helping elect a mayor to beat the Tammany machine. While Tom works undercover to help Ted Roosevelt purge police corruption, Vita's father arranges a marriage between her and a man she despises. When Tom's cousin is murdered, Vita's father and brother languish in jail, charged with the crime. Can Vita and Tom's love survive poverty, hatred, and corruption? So at the beginning of the chapter, we're introduced to Vita. The story does a great job of establishing her desperate situation and setting the scene of one of the poorer parts of 1920s New York, with smoky factories and half-starved urchins. We see Vita choosing to run rather than give evidence after witnessing a shooting, in fear that she will anger her boss. Soon after this section, we're introduced to Tom, a police officer who'd ordered Vita to give evidence at the scene of the crime. We see the blossoming of a romance between the two characters as they both linger in each other's minds after their initial meeting. I like the fact that from early on in the story, the reader is intrigued to know how the relationship will develop. Later in the chapter, Tom tries to help Vita get a new job in a bank after she's fired from her old post after being accused of stealing. As these events unfold, we meet a collection of interesting members of Vita's family. We're introduced to Vita's brother, Butchie, who has a history of petty crime and is wary of Tom. We meet Papa, Vita's father, who's clearly in charge of the family. He seems to pay Vita very little regard. I thought these characters added an extra layer of depth that made me want to read on as the story unfurled. So, that's From Here to 14th Street. If you like the sound of that, there's a link within the description where you can buy it. Next, I'm going to give some shout-outs to some other stories that have been sent to us quickly, and I'll read the synopsis for each one. The first is A Flicker in the Water by Bob Gonzalez. If you're yearning for tales about adventure and fun on the open sea, look no further. The crew welcomes you aboard the Twister, one of the finest fishing vessels in the Gulf of Mexico, as the search is on for the big ones that legends are made of. Blue marlin, yellowfish tuna, swordfish, and more are waiting to be caught, just so long as Bob and his friends have the strength to reel them in. Told in a fun, engaging style, this book combines elements of drama, heroism, and skill with humour and some educational points about the sea and its inhabitants, with plenty of surprises along the way. And next we have Owner Judge, I Am Free, a book by Diana Rubino and Piper Hughley. I apologise if I pronounced those names incorrectly. Owner Judge, I Am Free is based on this true and painful story of Owner Judge, known as One, Martha Washington's favourite servant, in One's own words. At the height of George Washington's presidency, One boldly defied orders and expectations. slipping past the watchful eyes of the nation's capital and finding refuge in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, despite their best efforts to reclaim her. Onay remained a spectre of freedom that eluded the Washingtons. Next, we have Twins of Fate by Sarah M. Wasson. All hope in the kingdom is lost. With the last of the royal lines chased into hiding, tyranny reigns. But a hidden prophecy of destined twins comes to light. So does old secrets. Will a desperate mother's choice doom the kingdom or give them hope for a better future? Next, we have The Witch's Debt by Edward Rollins. Witches, Werewolves, and Murder, contemporary fantasy set in rural southern West Virginia. Drawing from the legends and folklore of the place I grew up to tell stories about people and the challenges of life. The theme looks at the consequences of the choices we make for those around us, described as Desdon meets the Waltons. Lastly, we have Unsound Mind by A.J. Coulson. Travis Moon is a doting father, caring husband, and failing journalist. He needs a successful story and fast if he wants to keep a roof over his family's head. When Travis catches wind of an abandoned asylum, he is determined to uncover the truth behind its mysteries where others have failed. Why did one of the doctors lock everyone inside with the inpatients? Why did the police refuse to publicly announce what they had found? Travis is about to delve deeper into the past than he would have ever thought psychologically possible. So, if you like the sound of any of those stories, please check them out in the description below. If you've got a story that you want to send to us and want us to look at, there's also a link where you can submit that. All right. Well, thanks so much, Chris, again for speaking to me there. It was an interesting discussion, wasn't it, about those negative thoughts that people have and overcoming them. I guess just to leave people, once again, check out the prompts that we set at the start of the podcast. That was The Beast Appeared Through the Fog. Other than that, thank you so much for listening, and we'll
tune in next time.
Definitely, yeah. All right, bye.
Bye.